level available during that same period, Monday through Saturday, free on Sunday and weekends. The nice part is about the next two levels up in that deck represent approximately 250 additional spaces, and those are available after 6 p.m. as well as all weekend long, and they're free. So there's certainly an abundance of parking in the area. Outlying of that, a little further to the west, behind the Charlie Browns, is the lot we're all mostly parked in today. That's P5, the Snakes behind Charlie Browns. And then we have P12, which is the Millburn Township. I like to think of it as their lot, but it's a public lot. And then obviously there's other perimeter parking, which is typical in a downtown area. The property, the portion of the space that is being leased is actually 10,780 square feet. This has actually become, in the last couple of years, it's actually become a nice little successful strip with Pita on Essex was the anchor. Liv Brad's has been, I think, appropriately very successful. The wine rack, Dave's Liquor was looking pretty haggard. The wine rack has actually taken over. They have a great selection, and they've kind of spruced up. And this is the last element in that building, which is the Striker Realty. And the photo at the rear, you can see there's a dumpster at the rear of the property. We do have a neighbor, Mr. Futter, who's going to speak a little later about some of the problems the town has in managing those dumpster areas. But there is an area at the back to have a dumpster, but it does kind of conflict with some of the loading dock area. I will say that on the photograph you can see the door that's midway down the building. That's at the back of the tenant space. That is an area that can be used for loading. Liv Brad's does occasionally back into their loading dock, but a number of the other residents on the block also do park in a lot of the other delivery services actually do park on Essex in the no parking zone that exists over by the river that I had in college. They've become a pretty trendy item. Sakura does a good business in Rum, and they decided to break off and open a separate location. This has become a popular and actually fairly low impact type of restaurant, because you're cooking large vats of broth and then supplementing it with food noodles in that. So it's not cooking intensive. There certainly will be an Ansel system and scrubbers and ventilators on the top, but it's fairly low intensity use. But it's become a trendy kind of hip food item that we've seen from Ani Ramen in Montclair and now Jersey City, Inspiration Ramen in Summit, Morristown. It's becoming kind of a hip alternative to many of the other restaurants in the downtown. A restaurant is a permitted conditional use, the sole condition being that the closest part of the building or the structure so used needs to be at least 125 feet from the nearest lot line of a single-family dwelling in a residential district. Clearly, we're pretty far away. We're 468 feet from the closest residence in a residential district, and we have no drive-through. So those are the two requirements of the conditional use, and we meet both conditions. So we are therefore a permitted conditional use. If we look at the site data table on the site plan that was given out, you can see that lot 7, which is the public lot next to it, runs completely along our westerly side, and then it incorporates part of the river as it goes out to Millburn Avenue. If we now jump over and we look at the site data box, you can see that we're consistent with all of the bulk requirements of the B4 Central Business District. That's not hard because it permits 100% coverage, 0 lot lines, and we meet the height requirements. So we're fully compliant with the zoning criteria, with the exception, as with many of our downtown buildings, there's no on-site parking. So the applicant will require a variance for parking and loading. With regard to the parking, based upon the prior real estate office with some basement storage, the requirement was for 5 cars. With the 18-seat restaurant at a criteria of 1 parking space per 3 seats, that's 6 spaces, plus a fraction of a space for the basement, which is for storage only, brings us up to 7 cars in the proposed condition. So we go from a 7-car deficiency to, we go from a 5-car deficiency to a 7-car deficiency, which means we need variance relief for 2 extra spaces.
Excuse me, Mr. Council, the resolution state that Schleicher Realty requires 6 parking spaces.
It does actually, but in our calculation, on square footage, and we didn't do that site plan, so I don't know how they calculated, but we have pretty accurate, I actually have the development plans when that was a grocery store. So we were able to extrapolate from those and get pretty accurate square footages. So it may have been that they were using leased square footages, which are sometimes a little inflated, but by our calculation, it goes from 5 to 7. So we're asking for an environmental impact statement waiver. Obviously, it's a fully developed site. There's no added impervious area. There's no added square footage of space. There's no gross square footage increase. We are contiguous to the west branch of the Railway River, but none of the actions proposed with the build-out will require any kind of approvals from the Department of Environmental Protection. So we're asking for a waiver of environmental impact statement. With regard to the variances for parking, these are C1 variances for both the loading requirement and the parking. Under a C1 variance, to meet the positive criteria, you need to demonstrate there's a hardship created by the lot, and clearly we have an existing site that is fully developed. So the only way to get parking on this site would be to demolish half the building to provide parking, which is really anathema to the intent and purpose of our master plan and zoning ordinance. We don't want parking on site. We want parking in well-located perimeter parking areas. So that's the positive criteria. Under the negative criteria for the variance, obviously it's a two-pronged criteria. One is that there's no substantial detriment to the public good, and the other is that there's no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the master plan and zoning ordinance. And the word substantial is in both of those. So you're always going to get some temporary disruption or maybe some negative criteria, but is it substantial? With regard to the public detriment, we think that there is no detriment. Most all uses and properties within the B4 district require parking variances. Every restaurant that I know requires a parking variance. The applicant will be purchasing permits to cover all of their employees. We find that generally the denial of a parking variance for a permitted use would actually usurp the intent of the master plan, and at a minimum, to deny the parking variance requested would significantly restrict the owners of the property for use that has been deemed permitted within the district. With regard to the, and we think in general, it's always better to have a good business, one that has a track record, because it's really splitting off from Sakura. There's an interest, there's a demand, so we know it's a pent-up demand. We think it'll be successful, and we're taking, Stryker Realty has been lingering for a long time, but it's not been additive to the streetscape. It's not been additive to the vibrancy of the downtown or the pedestrian nature of the downtown. So by replacing that use with a thriving restaurant, a kind of hip new restaurant, we think will be a positive for the community. With regard to the master plan, permitted uses are presumptively deemed to be in the public interest. Our 2018 master plan reexamination actually addressed one of the problems that we see in our downtown, and that is the impact of retail shifts to e-commerce. And the master plan states that retail is struggling throughout the state and the county and the country, both on main streets and in its malls. It's no secret e-commerce has had an impact. One impact of this trend is an increase in downtown vacancies, and this trend is evident in some extent in Millburn, to some extent in Millburn. To combat vacancies, many communities have sought to attract experiential retail uses in their downtown locations, and they can range from health and fitness facilities, which we now permit, indoor recreation areas, which we permit by some cases by ordinance and some cases by use variance for the swim school in the downtown, entertainment, retail, and restaurants. There are some others. Restaurants have been a critical element in preserving the vibrancy of our downtowns. They attract people, they keep them in at night, and especially when you provide a variety of restaurants, especially ones that tend to be hip and trendy, it's vibrant for your downtown. The old master plan actually specifically discouraged on-site parking in the B4 district. The new master plan isn't as explicit, but it's still in there. The primary goals and objectives of the master plan, goal number 1 is to encourage appropriate land uses that will promote the character of the township as a small suburb of the highest quality. And goal number 2 is to promote, improve, and support efficient streets and sidewalks. And under that goal 2 is objective 2.03, which is to allow for conveniently located parking in central business districts. I would note that it does not say to create additional on-site parking for existing buildings or permitted uses. It sort of reinforces our original intent in the downtown that we want people to park in well-located perimeter parking lots and walk to their use. And by now going to 3 hours, it enhances the likelihood that someone will go to yoga, or they'll go to Flywheel, or they'll go get their nails done, or their hair done, and afterwards they'll go to Live Breads, or they'll go to a cafe, or they'll go out for lunch, or they'll stay and go for dinner. So we think this is certainly contributory to the downtown, to the vibrancy. We see in no way would granting this parking variance and variance for loading space be contrary to the intent and purpose of the master plan. Clearly, when it comes to refuse, I think one of the people in the audience, Mr. Futter, will probably stand up and tell you, it's been kind of a nightmare in the back for dumpsters, and that needs to be managed. It is township property, and I think the town, under the direction of the business administrator, needs to kind of work with all the landlords who are managing dumpsters in the back to make sure they're in a proper location, to make sure that it doesn't become an auxiliary parking lot to avoid parking permits. That's really out of the scope of this tenant. This tenant has an area for a dumpster that can be located on the site. It would conflict with the loading dock, but Live Breads doesn't use the loading dock much in the back. So I think there is space on site, but I think that any of the problems associated with the use of that alleyway really come under the purview of the township and enforcement of that area. We think this is a great application. I'm excited to see that space taken. I'm excited to see a ramen shop, a noodle shop coming to town. We think it's a good application. We hope that you approve it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. How many square feet did you say was being rented here?
It is 1,200, let me just make sure I get the right numbers. It is 1085, excuse me.
1080.
I'm
1085.
sorry, you said 1085?
1085.
1080, you said
Yeah.
10,000.
Sorry,
Yeah, I'm sorry,
10,000.
You said 10,000.
I thought, well,
whole
it's a
building.
restaurant.
A little tongue-tied, yeah. No, that would be a big ramen shop.
That would be a big one.
That'd be a lot of
I
noodles.
have a couple of other questions. Have you, or has anyone done a title search to determine who actually is the owner of the strip alongside the building that is used for access to
Well,
the rear?
I have not seen, I was not furnished with a title survey, and we didn't do a new title survey. We can see from the survey that the building is only 0.2 to 0.3 feet off the property line. So the entire alleyway and fire zone are all on lot 7, which is the town lot. I don't have a title binder to know what rights are inherent in that, and that's why, in my mind, if the town doesn't want us to use it as loading, we would use loading where the liquor store gets loaded out from, where Live Bread gets loaded out from, as well as PETA.
Where is that, from the street?
They load from the street. So if that was a problem with the township, or we didn't have the rights, we have no problem using the same loading that all of the other restaurants use.
That was my question. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Is the dumpsters to which you refer on township property, or are they on this property, or are they on somebody else's property?
Right now, they're both on, there is room for it to be on this property, but they tend to not be. They tend to float onto lot 7, and then they float onto Mr. Futter's property, because his property comes from Millburn Avenue, comes through to the back of it. So the dumpsters that are there, and depending upon any which day you look at it, they're like moving tiles. They could be anywhere back there, but I think the photograph, there, you can see on the photo we handed out, it's a little blocked by a noonday shadow. The dumpsters are lined up right behind Mr. Futter's building. There is an area of the loading dock. If we look at our survey, there is an area where dumpsters can fit into our property in the back. It does conflict with the day-to-day use of that loading dock, but as indicated, partially because there were some Jersey curbs back there and some township stuff back there, Live Breads tends to more load to the front than load to the back.
With regard to the dumpster location, if they're private dumpsters, doesn't the owner or the people who retain those service facilities have the ability to get the dumpster in the right place? I mean, it's not something that, I mean, you figuratively talked about it floating around.
Yeah.
And there are things that float around at times that are of a lighter nature, but a dumpster is something, you put it there and it stays there. So I'm missing the point as to why these things can't just be put where they're supposed to be put.
It's laziness on the part of the carter. And so the landlord, it's joint carting, so the landlord, and if my clients have any control over the loading, they can certainly enforce that, but generally it's the landlord, I think, who arranges for combined carting. But they clearly need to get that handled, and it's pretty easy. I mean, the refuse company is pretty responsible. If you say you will be fired if the dumpsters don't go back in the right spot, it's been fairly lax. I think I just found out when, the Hills has dumpsters back there, and we think some of the ones actually back there may have migrated over from the back of the Hills over to that area. When it was Martini's, they used to be right behind the building. So I don't even know whose dumpsters they are, but certainly there is spot on our property, and we're advocating that the business administrator and the township committee really get after all of those combined owners back there to get the dumpsters at least proximate to where they go, get the parking out of that area. But my client we don't know, to be honest with you. We don't think that all those dumpsters are for these four uses. We think that it's a combined use of the other Umi sushi restaurant, from the Hills, from Pizzetta. So they're all back there, and I think what happens is when the carting company comes, they pick it up and they dump it in the most convenient spot.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting your client should be responsible for that. I'm just, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't think I've ever heard the term migrating dumpsters.
Yep.
So I wanted to find out more. Thank you.
It's one of the there's a lot of hidden secrets in these back alleys behind buildings.
It seems like you know a lot of that.
We get to work on a number of them, yes.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Great. Any other questions from the board?
I mean, this has nothing to do with perhaps anything, but I've always suggested that if you were willing to make a donation to the city to plant a tree there, if it's such a virtual desert. I had lunch with one of the council members at Summit, and they basically, their favorite spot is Ani, and it makes it a lot more pleasant experience when you have trees, and that's virtually, she made the same comment, that she liked going to Pizza on Essex from Summit, but it's basically our downtown is a virtual desert. There aren't a lot of trees. But if you were willing to work with the forester to see if they would, or you would plant.
Where would you
in
put
that
a
year,
tree?
on the sidewalk.
I believe the forester said no comment.
Yeah. I think
No, I know, because it's not a requirement. It would be just sort of we don't have a lot of trees in our downtown, and it makes, I think one of the reasons that people linger more on the streets of Summit or Maplewood, I believe, has something to do with the fact that trees really not only contribute to reducing, heat island impact.
I know Mr. Doty has a large area of trees available to go into the downtown. I don't know whether it's holed up over phase 2 or 2.9 or 2.B, whatever, of complete streets, what's been the holdup, but there certainly are trees available, and it's really up to Mr. Doty to place those, but certainly we'd love it.
I have a question on the refuse. I'm just concerned that hearing that all these places dump in maybe one or two receptacles, and this is a restaurant as opposed to the Realtor group that didn't have hardly any, probably, refuse.
Mhm.
It's food waste.
Yep.
And it looks like it's a long walk in the middle of winter. I'm a little concerned that the garbage may not make it there, or maybe it's too much for it, or what do you think about that?
Generally, this would be the third food use in that group, and it is becoming a dominant use in our downtowns. There is, I believe, only one of those, I'm not sure, but I know there are other dumpsters from other food uses back there. Generally, what happens is if the dumpster is not enough, there's enough room for one or maybe two small dumpsters on the property. Generally, what happens is if it gets exceeded, the capacity gets exceeded, they add a day or add another 2 days of pickup. So they sometimes pick up 5 days a week. So that's easily controlled in that regard. With regard to the walking distance, it's just the way it is. And I was just in Maplewood this morning and watching the people from Able Baker hump the garbage almost 400 feet around the corner up to the dumpster that's on Baker Street. And it's just what has to be done. And it's unfortunate, but it's the way that a lot of our downtowns work with the dumpsters being hidden down alleys. And there's a walk-in in the winter. That's what they're paid to do. But there certainly wouldn't be an ability to drag a dumpster any closer to the egress because it'd be in a fire lane.
Any other questions? Any questions from the public for this witness?
Is this where I can make a comment too?
No, just questions for this witness pertaining to his testimony.
Okay, actually, Rich, I do have a question. The ventilation, where,
You have to get sworn in. Oh, not for questions, oh, okay.
Okay, Richard Footer, 335 Millburn Avenue. Could you show me where the ventilation is going to be?
In my discussions with the architect, it would be somewhere in the area of the P and the A, or the O and the T under what's proposed and that stuff. So, because our space is not full depth, it will be for the back quadrant of our property. This is the full depth of the building. So our tenant space is a little less than half the depth.
where's the back of my building?
The back of your building is right here. So we're a good 80 feet from the ventilation will be a good 80 feet from your property.
Okay, I heard you make comments and what you need as far as parking goes. I didn't hear anything about requiring parking permits for the employees.
Yeah, generally, it's the practice of this board to require a parking permit for every employee. The applicant has indicated that they'll have 4 employees, so my suspicion is the board would require 4 parking permits.
Okay, and as far as dumpsters go, what are your views on compactors to reduce the space needed for dumpsters? And I'm not talking just for this applicant.
Compactors come in a variety of sizes, so if we have, we might have the room for a small one on our property back there. It's unclear that we would have enough on our property to do a compactor. I'm generally in favor of them, but I'm not sure, given the fact that we go property line to property line, and the fact that we've got a concrete area behind the building, we may be able to fit a compactor.
But what about in the basement?
It's certainly possible. We don't often see compactors in the basements, but
Thank you.
Just based on your experience at Socorro, are you anticipating more of an eat-in or a takeout?
You mean the Sakura, right?
Yeah, no, I'm saying for the ramen house.
To go will be, I believe will be more, because when you sit on 18, to go will be more. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Mr. Keller, do you know whether the prior use was purchasing any parking permits?
I believe it's in the resolution that that they had to purchase 6. Actually, I don't have the resolution.
It
right
says
there.
6, Rich. Yeah.
I know that was their demand. I don't know how many they were required to purchase.
Well, the reason I ask you that, if I recall the ordinance section that we refer to,
If you look at
Was it
page
3?
5
3 for
of
the
the
employees?
resolution,
Yeah.
point number 3,
3.
it says 3, at least 3 permits for the 3 employees.
So that may answer your question. So we've increased the number by 2 over what's current, I believe.
well, the way the ordinance actually works is that you're required to purchase a parking permit for any deficiency in parking. So if you have 2 deficiencies based upon the analysis that you did, although the application refers to 1, you'd have to purchase 2 parking permits. While I understand there's logic in perhaps getting parking permits for your employees, that's not what the ordinance says. The ordinance ties it to what increased number of parking spaces you need that you're not supplying.
Correct.
But in addition to that, it also requires that the applicant continue to purchase parking permits that the previous use had purchased, if they had purchased any. So
Correct.
that's why I asked the question. So here, if my math is right, we're talking about 5 parking permits, 3 that were always purchased or were purchased previously,
Correct.
and the 2 deficient ones.
That's the way the ordinance under the parking exemption in the B4 district is read. But obviously, this board, we've noticed for a parking variance, this board can either follow that ordinance, or they can follow the other principle, which has been generally to require permits for each employee. Whatever the town, the board deems appropriate, we think it would be, I don't know what purpose would be served if there's 4 employees to buy 5 permits. But if that was the feeling of the board, obviously we would go along with that. But rationally, this board can approve it. We've noticed for a variance, so we don't meet the criteria for the exemption. So I think this board can determine the appropriate number of parking spaces. Take that on out.
Okay. Can I open up to the public? Any questions? Oh, we were already open.
Comments.
Oh, any comments from the public on this application?
Yes. Richard Footer, 335 Millburn Avenue. I recognize that some of these comments may just barely touch on their application, but there are 2 issues. One of them is the dumpsters. And what I'm looking for is to not have an exacerbation to what already exists. I started to print out pictures. I'm sorry I only have 1 set. There was a little incident today, and this is as far as I got, but I can email you all of these. The first 2 pages are from 2 days ago, and the last page is from...
Should we label?
Yes, yeah, I'm gonna mark this 01. And we'll put today's date on it. Will you be referring to any individual photograph here in particular, or?
Not necessarily. Only one where there seems to be a grease,
All right, well, just give me
Dumpster.
1 minute. We'll mark this 01.
Okay.
And we'll mark each photograph of 01
Okay.
sequentially, photograph A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. This way, sir, when you refer, you can refer to those letters. And before we go any further, did you take all of these photographs?
I took those pictures.
Do these photographs reflect what you actually saw when you took the picture?
Those pictures reflect more than what I saw, because when I looked at them, there were things that I didn't see with my eye.
Okay. But they do reflect what was out there when you took the picture?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right, so we'll mark these 01, as I said, A, B, C, through G. I
Those,
think.
those pictures are really to show you, there was some discussion about it. You don't seem to be the type of people that hang out in the alleys. So I figured just to show you what's doing around our building, these dumpsters seem to have multiplied almost to be like an anklet around the building. It's really not nice. And they have come from different places. There's only 1 picture in there that has some print next to it that shows a grease pit.
Why don't you tell me which one it is so that the board members can look at that one?
The middle one. That's a grease pit.
Okay, that's
right on
B,
top.
that's B,
B.
01B.
01.
Right.
And you're referring to the cylinder here.
Are you referring to the cylinder
cylinder?
next to the
The
dumpster?
the one that says grease pit next to it.
This is a 55 gallon drum.
Mr. Futter, can you tell us what property, whose property that is on?
That's our property. That's actually part of the property. It's 335. It could be 333 or 335. We own both of those side by side. basically, the issue with the dumpsters is you give out resolutions to restaurants that have appeared before. I don't know what the resolutions say, but if there's any teeth in it as far as enforcement goes, this should not be happening. I mean, I can't imagine that the planning board told these restaurants just put them around Footer's building, he doesn't care, you know, but I think, and I really would like to think that the property owner may not know what the tenants are doing, but by the amount of dumpsters that are there, I raised the issue of compactors, because I've heard, we have buildings for lease now. We haven't rented them yet. But there have been issues with, there've been a couple of restaurants that have shown interest in it. And I tell them flat out, you know, that's not our property. And I can't tell you to put a dumpster there, but you may want to consider compactors, a compactor in the basement. And then you might have one dumpster to deal with, and maybe the town would allow it, but I can't speak for the town. The other issue that I do want to speak to is that with all the restaurants that form the perimeter of that alleyway, I get here at the crack of dawn in the morning. Hardly anybody's up and about. But during the day and in the evening, that alley is so loaded with cars that it's almost like going to a New York City valet parking area. All of the kitchens surround that alleyway. If there's ever a fire there, the fire department's never going to be able to get in, and that whole block could go up. So I don't know what kind of verbiage is in your resolutions, but if there is any teeth in there, I've been talking to Mr. McDonald, Alex, and perhaps if you know of anything in your resolutions that could help him, that would be nice. I think the dumpsters really need to be controlled, but the issue of the safety with the fire issue, I've raised that for a couple of years, and I started doing it again in August of 2018. So that's basically my comment. Other than that, I wish you well. And God bless you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Anybody else? Any other comments from the public? No?
Close.
Okay, so we'll close the public portion and open it up for discussion by the board.
I just want to make second what Mr. Footer said. You know, the property is the fire lane, therefore the fire lane is, you know, has restrictions, and there shouldn't be parking there, and that is a township situation, and I would hope that you also take that to Alex and David and the township committee where it's really more of an appropriate request as opposed to the planning board, something that we really can't opine on. But we certainly agree, and we do respect that the fact that we need safe places in our downtown, and I know I've seen that before as well, but there are restrictions for parking there, and that shouldn't be happening, that should be controlled, but it's really something that we can't deal with in this application. So, but I do respect what you had said. The other thing is that our master plan reexamination emphasized the walkability of our downtown area and the importance of that. And I think that an application like this is consistent with the reexamination in terms of bringing more people to the downtown. I think it's, as opposed to a real estate office, this is something that is going to attract people from the township and outside the township to our town. So I think it's a great use, an appropriate use, and consistent with our master plan. Reexamination report.
My comment is basically the same as you've just heard. That's why I asked the question about that alleyway. I don't think that, I'd even like to see the resolution with a provision in it that prohibits loading in that area. I don't know that it's a fire lane, but I suppose it
There
is.
a fire lane there.
Gotta be.
Yeah, there is a fire lane there, Joe.
And I think it would be inconsistent for the planning board to approve this use, which I'm totally in favor of, without saying that the fire lane, that alleyway should not be used for loading. Because you know what's gonna happen. Somebody will pull a truck in there, they'll get out, they'll start carrying stuff into the building, the truck will sit there, and nobody will be able to get in and out of that alleyway. So I'd like to see a prohibition against loading there. The other uses seem to be doing fine, loading from the street, and from the parking spaces that are sometimes available on the street, not often, in my experience. I don't think that we can do anything with this tenant toward cleaning up the problem with the dumpsters, or with the cars parking in that fire lane. That's a township issue. The township should be on top of it, and the police department should be on top of it. But I don't think that it makes any sense to impose anything on this tenant. This tenant has no jurisdiction, legal or otherwise, over that alleyway, or for that matter, over any other portion of the building, other than the 1,200, it is 1,200, not 12,000, right? Square feet that it's leasing. And as far as the parking permits are concerned, my experience on this board has always been that we've insisted on parking permits be purchased in the same amount as the testimony has been as to the number of employees in the space. The testimony was 4 employees. I think it's appropriate for parking permits to be required. I have no other comments except that I'm in favor of the application.
Great, thank you. Any other comments?
Just that I think it's a wonderful use, and it'll be a nice addition. There doesn't seem to be any negative about it. I was gonna comment that it's interesting that the fire marshal didn't seem to have any problems with the site, but I'm sure maybe getting the township involved, they will wanna talk to the fire department and as separate from the application. But looks like there needs some attention there. It certainly is a mess. It looks awful. And the thing is, you really can't see much going on from Essex Street or Millburn Avenue, so, you know, it's probably why it has evolved the way it is now, just because it seems to be sort of hidden. But anyway, it's not nice, and I hope there will be some changes there, but.
Madam Chairman, I have just one other comment.
Sure.
And that is that Mr. Keller's ramen from college is stale by now.
You can still buy those
Yeah.
little
It comes
packages,
down.
they're still available.
No, they're not.
Yeah, I think they're preserved forever.
Yeah, yeah.
I like those bunny purses at Easter.
Those marshmallow things.
Marshmallow. It may also attract people from out of town, because I think it'll be the only ramen house within a 10-mile radius that has a takeout component. I mean, Ani does not. And my kids don't
You know, we had experience at Sakura, we had a lot to go. So saying the customers will be the same in the Sakura, so we had a lot to go, especially for a teenager and a teen kid.
I don't think
And like Millburn Middle School, high school, they all my family friend, so they all to go. Things like, oh, okay, say hi to me, and then they bring home. It's easy for me.
That's great. Would anyone like to make
I'll make a motion that we approve the application with the condition, two conditions at least that I can think of. One, that there'll be no loading from that alleyway that is either owned by the municipality or over which the municipality has an easement, whichever it is. And secondly, that the applicant, upon receiving a certificate of occupancy, purchase 4 parking permits from the municipality.
We'd also have to, just to
Oh, yes.
dot the i's and cross the t's, waive the checklist items and waive the EIS,
You could
make it-
consider that part of my motion.
and make a determination that the applicant has met the conditions of the conditional use, and granting the variances for the providing of parking spaces and the providing of a loading space.
That's why you're there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now you can make,
That's all part of the motion.
now you can make
That's so moved.
it. Second.
Damon Bear,
Yes.
Elaine Becker,
Yes?
Joseph Steinberg.
Yes.
Mark Mansell,
Yes.
Tracy Goldenberg,
Yes.
Miriam Salerno.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
good luck. Okay,
I
so,
only have one other comment.
yes,
When I go home tonight, my wife will wonder who's raising the garage door at
I know.
8:40.
how was that?
When the zoning board was accustomed to doing
Call-
it.
call-
I 11 to 8:40.
Call in advance.
Okay, now do we need a motion to adjourn?
Before you make
Yeah.
the motion, I just wanted to mention that if you haven't had a chance to see the email that Eileen sent to us relevant to purchase of parking permits, please read it. I think it's great, and it